Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie McGrath, editor of Forbes Women. A new study finds that a large majority of women, about 65% in fact, find personal finances not just stressful, but also anxiety-inducing. Joining us now to discuss this research are two people who were instrumental in bringing it to the world. That is Allison Brady, a VP at HarrisX, and Alyssa Schaefer. She leads Laurel Road's business, and Laurel Road commissioned this research, and she is also Laurel Road's Chief Experience Officer. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So, Alyssa, I want to start with you because this is the 8th year in a row that you guys have spearheaded this research. Why is it so important for you to look at this data year after year after year when it comes to women and money and anxiety?
Good question, Maggie. So as you said, this is our 8th annual survey focusing on the differences or really the sentiments of women and their personal finances. And when we first started it, it really was a comparison of men and women. So we had split the population about 50-50 and surveyed over 1,000 women and 1,000 men. And we were looking at the differences, and we did that for a number of years. And the motivation there was at the very beginning, was really just to understand was there a difference. And we, in fact, found there were some pretty striking differences. And then it really evolved. And this year, we didn't actually do a comparison to men and women. We wanted to really focus specifically on women as a segment. And we wanted to understand year-over-year trends as well as generational trends within women. So it's really evolved over the years and the purposes for doing it. But the main reason why we've continued to do it is really to bring awareness on how women feel about managing their personal finances. And also, it's really spurred a lot of internal conversations around what we can do about it. We've spurred some partnerships based on this research that have been really instrumental in supporting women. And we have also developed some internal and external training programs and content to support women during their financial journey.
Interesting. We can dive more into the generational differences, but I want to start also by asking you, was there one piece of this year's report that was most surprising to you?
I think one of the things that was most surprising, and you mentioned that in your opening, Maggie, is that 65% of women find personal finances their top stressor or a top stressor. This has remained consistent, even though there are other categories of what their top stressors could be. They are second and third to personal finances as a top stressor, but they've actually decreased in the magnitude of how stressful they are for women. Those two things are their health as well as family responsibility. So even though some of the categories seem to go down as their prominence of being a top stressor, managing finances has remained the top one. And that's been a surprise because a lot of the categories tend to be consistent year over year. And as I mentioned, personal finance has been consistent while the other ones have decreased.
I want to bring Allison into the conversation with the same question. Allison, as you look at this data, is the same piece surprising to you, or was there something else that jumped out at you as being like, wow, I did not expect that?
Yeah, there's a lot of surprising data in this survey, and we're honored to be a part of it with Laurel Road. What was really interesting for us is some of the promising trends that we're seeing among younger generations of women, Gen Z and millennial women, and how they are feeling more proactive about taking control of their finances, having conversations with personal networks, leveraging social media to get financial guidance. So there's a lot that's promising there in terms of, women feeling empowered to have conversations and to focus on their financial goals.
Now, this data was collected in February, and if I'm thinking about how I felt about my personal finances in February and what was happening in the news, we had some market volatility. There was a lot of news about tariffs. I myself was actually very stressed about it right about the time that you were collecting this data. So I'm wondering, did folks tell you what was driving their anxiety, or did they just say personal finance is my top stressor?
Well, one of the things that we found was that a vast majority of women, 78% of them, said that the current economy actually makes them feel more uneasy about meeting their financial goals. And we didn't dig into exactly what those financial goals were, but you can imagine paying off student loans or buying a home or, saving for retirement, those types of things. So that was an increase from year over year. Just really the sentiment of the economy and the uncertainty of it right now, which I think really adds to the anxiety of that personal finances really being a top stressor for women.
And we've seen some consistent trends over the years that we've run this study of where women are focused in terms of their finances and where they feel behind. Retirement savings is number one, followed by credit card debt, and finally salary. But we started to see some emerging trends among Gen Z are focused on investments and salary, and millennials have a lot of financial goals and pressures, home ownership being one of them, as Alyssa just mentioned.
I can imagine home ownership is a big one, speaking from my own experience, just watching the market go up and knowing the challenges that can exist there. Allison, you alluded to this, but I want to dig into this a little bit more. There was a really interesting sub-finding, if you will, that kind of looked at the confidence level among women, but also the anxiety. And my takeaway here is that women generally feel pretty confident about how they can manage their money, and yet it is still a huge stressor. What explains that kind of divergence?
Yeah, well, as we mentioned, there's a lot of economic stress that they are facing from external factors. But the promising insight is that 70% of women feel confident in managing their finances, and they're being resourceful. There's a lot of different ways that they are looking to manage their finances, learn more information. As I mentioned before, we have 44% of women say they turn to friends and family to discuss finances. 30% say social media. For Gen Z, that climbs almost up to half of Gen Z women saying they turn to social media. And with the emergence of social media, financial influencers and trends, there's a lot of different ways that women can budget, that they can save money. Despite the external economic stress that they're facing, we see that confidence, which is the silver lining. And they're confident because they are leveraging what they have access to in terms of financial guidance. We see a lot of trends that emerge on social media that provide different ways that they can earn or save money. Side hustles is something that we saw very prevalent among especially the Gen Z and millennial women that we interviewed. So there's a lot of different ways that they're focused on this, but there's still more opportunity for them to learn more. There's a lack of trust in social influencers. There's so much guidance out there. They're not necessarily sure what they can trust. So, professional financial guidance, financial tools, budgeting apps, things of that nature are something that are going to be really important for women.
Alyssa, I was going to ask you, as someone who runs business operations at Laurel Road, does it concern you that so many people are turning to social media for answers on their finances?
Yes and no. I mean, I think social media can be a resource, and we're seeing in the data that it absolutely is a resource. But it's interesting because only 10% of those that are using social media and looking at the financial trends within social media actually trust it as a true resource to make decisions. So I think it's important to have a little caution, right? Because there's so much content out there. And even though, as Allison said, women are using social media and finding out more about their personal finances through social, they're also talking about it more on social, which is a wonderful sign that they care about it more. The trust factor isn't quite there yet. Another point that Allison mentioned, but really only 10% of women trusting it as a reliable financial resource. I just think you have to have a little caution there. The other thing that I think is really interesting that goes along with this trend is that the majority of women, 65% we found, trust financial advisors and other financial experts, but only 20% are actually seeking their advice out proactively. I think that is a huge opportunity to do more there. As Allison mentioned, the research showed that many women are looking to their own personal networks, including friends and family, but they're not yet tapping into the actual professional financial advisors and experts out there. So we believe that's a big opportunity, especially for women.
Did they say why they're not accessing those professional sources? Is it the cost? Is it time? Is there some sort of impediment that we're not aware of?
I don't think we can draw conclusions from the data from that specifically, because we didn't specifically ask that. But I think it is probably, if I could just sort of infer, and other things that we've done here, it's really about just the proactiveness, because over time, what we've seen is that women are now talking about their finances a lot more. So the conversation is there. They're going to social. They're using some of the budgeting apps more often than they were in previous years. But I think they're not yet taking that extra step to talk to a real professional yet.
Allison, you mentioned side hustles. So did you, Alyssa. It's come up a few times now, and we at Forbes love an entrepreneurial mindset. So can you each talk about what struck you in this data when it comes to how women are seeking side hustles, and also if there's anything you learned about what specific side hustles they might be turning towards to supplement their income?
Yeah. So we don't have any data on specific side hustles, but we found that nearly half of the women we surveyed either themselves have participated in a side hustle or know someone who has. This is a very common trend that we've seen in other data among Gen Z in particular. And to see the amount of women, Gen Z, that are participating in this is really promising. It shows that they are working hard, trying to earn money, given all of the financial stress that they're facing. And then some other trends that emerged are things like no spend challenges, DIY, do it yourself, really methods that are focused on saving money. The trends that we saw a little bit less engagement on from women are related to budgeting, to debt repayment, and to investing. I think there's some opportunity for more education in terms of those financial trends, but definitely very promising in terms of the side hustles.
That's interesting. So people are doing no spend challenges like no spend January, but they're eschewing budgeting.
Budgeting apps are definitely an under leveraged resource for women. It could be access, understanding of where to go and what to trust. But, they're focused more on what they're seeing on social media, right? We had 48% of Gen Z women tell us that social media is where they go for financial advice and trends.
Alyssa, do you have anything to add on the side hustle conversation here?
No, I think Allison covered it perfectly in terms of what the data told us.
Allison, you mentioned Gen Z in your last answer, and I understand that this data does kind of break down generational differences. Alyssa, what jumped out at you in terms of the difference between how Gen Z, Millennial, Gen X women are looking at and managing their money?
One of the most striking stats that we found actually was about where people go to tap in their networks, where people go to find financial advice. And 76%, an overwhelmingly percentage of Gen Z women look to their parents for financial advice. The percentages were much lower for some of the other generations. So I just thought that was a striking, not entirely surprising, right? But it was a striking difference there of, just the majority of people in Gen Z, majority of women going to their parents and looking to their parents for financial advice. And I think it's also telling of a lot of things that we were reading in the economy around the wealth transfer and things like that. So that really struck out to me.
I was just about to say, when we think about the trillions of dollars that stand to be transferred among generations, turning to family actually makes a lot of sense in that context. Allison, I'll turn to you. In terms of the generational breakdown, was there anything about Millennial or Gen X women and how they manage their money that you think is especially striking?
Yeah. So with Millennial women, they're kind of that bridge generation where we see them engaging a bit more in social media, and also their parents to a lesser extent than Gen Z. But that is something that they're focused on. And in terms of their goals, we mentioned home ownership. Profession is also, and career is also a major source of financial stress in their life. So that's something that they're focused on as well. I would have to get back to you on the Gen X. I can dig into the data now if that's something that we want to talk about.
When you say career is a stress, is it that they're not making enough money? Because I'm thinking about the side hustles, right? So side hustles can be a sign of taking charge of your finances, right? But it can also be a signal that your primary job is not meeting the bills. Did folks tell you anything about anything specific about what their primary jobs are paying them?
We don't have any specifics in the data in terms of what about their career is causing stress, but what we can infer from seeing that it is a major source of stress for Gen Z and millennial women tells us that these are people that are more nascent in their careers. They might not have yet established themselves in a career. We also saw with Gen Z women that education and their educational goals are a source of stress. So this is something that's signaling to us that they are apprehensive about their careers, their trajectory, and also their finances as well, as those go hand in hand, and might be picking up more side hustles, as you mentioned, to pay the bills in addition to their day job.
We've covered a lot of ground, but I want to ask you both, is there anything we've not discussed that you think is especially important about this year's data and maybe compared to prior years?
I think we discussed a lot of it. Like I said, we in years prior, we have always compared men versus women, and those trends didn't really seem to move a whole lot, which is why this year we decided to focus only on women. So the trends that we saw in previous years, you can imagine, right? Women were less confident in talking about their finances than men. Women less often asked for a raise and less often got that raise than men, their male counterparts. However, over the years, we did see those trends increase for women. So if we had compared to men this year, I think we would have seen some increases as well. So we are gaining some ground versus our male counterparts. But this study, like I said, focused on women. And I think it is interesting to see some of those generational differences and the fact that I think Allison called it out in the beginning that women are more confident than they have been in previous years, at least talking about their finances and having those conversations, whether it's with their friends and family in their personal networks or on social media, which I think is a great sign. I think there's still a lot of work to be done for women to continue to be proactive in managing their personal finances. And I would just encourage women out there listening to seek some professional advice. You don't have to make millions or even close to millions to get the advice of a financial advisor. At Laurel Road, we do a lot of counseling and free consultations if you have student loans and what best to do there as a specialized form of advice. So I would just encourage women out there to continue to be proactive and really seek professional advice if they feel like they need it.
Yeah, and what's clear to me is that, in this data, we see a lot of the younger generation taking control of their finances and being proactive. So that's something we expect to see as we continue to see those generations move into the next phase of their life. And as Alyssa said, this is very promising. They are looking for guidance. It's very clear. They're working with, their families, talking about these things. They're going to social media. There's so much noise on social media. There's not really a way for them to gauge, what's good advice and what's not. And so this is a great opportunity for them to look for more professional financial guidance. And there's a lot of tools out there, everything that Laurel Road has to offer. There's a lot of opportunity for women to continue to empower themselves.
Now, I know we're talking about data that was collected in February, but if I can ask you both to look into your crystal balls, based on what you see in this year's data and what you see, especially around what you just talked about the confidence and about the seeking of resources, do you think that the 2026 version of this research will find that personal finances are not as stressful for women as they've been in prior years?
Maggie, I would just speculate a little bit by saying that, last year, it was also the vast majority of women that felt a lot of anxiety due to economic factors in terms of managing their finances and meeting those goals. So that was pretty consistent year over year, but we have to remember that last year was an election year. This year in February, obviously the new administration was taking shape and will continue to. Regardless of what we all think about the administration, I think certainty is a good thing. So as the year continues to unfold, at least we will have some certainty on some big economic changes, right? So I think women will hopefully start to settle a little bit and become even more confident in their ability to manage their personal finances through any and all transitions. Because again, last year was an election year, always brings a lot of anxiety and uncertainty. This year, early days on the administration, and I think certainty is a good thing either way. that allows people more confidence in what they can do with their personal finances.
Well, Alyssa Schaefer, Allison Brady, thank you so much for joining us to discuss this research. It's really interesting, and we will have to have you back when you do that 2026 version.
Thank you.